often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. In today's episode of the Liturgical Rebels, I will be in conversation with Victoria Loorz, a wild church pastor, eco-spiritual director, and co-founder of several transformation-focused organizations focused on the integration of nature and spirituality. These include the Wild Church Network and Seminary of the Wild. She is also author of 2 books, Church of the Wild, How Nature Invites Us into the Sacred, and Field Guide to Church of the Wild. Her 3rd book, Wild Spirituality, is coming in fall 2026. Victoria tells me that she feels most alive when collaborating with mystery and kindred spirits to create opportunities for people to remember themselves back into intimate, sacred relationship with the rest of the living world. Victoria, I have been really looking forward to this conversation. I feel that we are in many ways kindred spirits. And so welcome to the Liturgical Rebels podcast.
Oh, thank you, Christine. Well, I've known about you and your husband for pretty much my whole career, right?
Wow.
When I got out of seminary, I went to work for World Vision. And I worked with Paul Thompson on ecological, creation care, we called it back then.
Yes.
And so I wrote that creation care kit. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember it. Yes.
So I remember you were one of the people that I was following even back then.
Oh, wow. Wow. Amazing.
35 years ago.
It's the connections that I find often with people are just incredible, But, of course, in the last 35 years, then, you have done a lot. You have helped to found the Wild Church Network and the Seminary of the Wild. But your journey actually began in a different form of church and seminary. So can you tell us a little bit more about your history and the journey that brought you to the place that you're at now?
Sure. I mean, that could take up the whole podcast. I'll tell it as short.
Yeah, the Reader's Digest version, as we used to say. Yes.
Right, exactly. So I basically became a Christian in my 20s. And I was working at Disney Studios at the time. And it was like this very radical, one of those radical shifts of heart, And after about, I think it was only like a year, I felt which is a whole story in itself. I felt a call to ministry, So Fuller Seminary was the only seminary. I didn't even know what seminary was. And went to school. But by the time I was graduating, I felt like I felt more called to be an advocate for women and children. And so I was going to go to law school, but ended up getting a job at World Vision. And so this is relevant because my big last project that I did there, it was over a year that I worked on it, was to create a creation care kit for evangelicals. And so I was...
Which they probably weren't ready for.
They probably weren't, but we sent it to 50,000 evangelical churches.
Wow.
And then we had a follow-up kit that was like a resource kit for worship resources. And it was a big kit with a bunch of things in it. And quite a few, maybe about a third of the churches ordered them. So I
Oh,
think this is
wonderful.
before it was so divisive,
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
because it was just so obvious to me. Like, why is this not part of
Yes.
our own? Yeah, then and so that was kind of like the middle of my world, and then I had a baby, and I left work altogether for several years, and I was just about to get rid of all of my ecological spirituality kind of books, which that wasn't even a word then, but when my son was 12.
Mm.
And I just last second said, "Oh, I think he'd like to watch An Inconvenient Truth."
Ah.
Um, and because he loved volcanoes and stuff. And so he did, and he was like just transformed just
Mm.
watching the documentary, and he's, 12. And he went to school the next day and was like advocating for his friends to stop global warming and everything. And anyway, very long story short, he ended up quitting school by seventh grade. I ended up leaving my work I was doing marketing at the time. I'd already left the church as a pastor. And I thought I was just leaving the church, and that's a whole other story too. Just the frustrations of being a pastor. I'm sure you have whole episodes on that. But
Mhm.
but we started a nonprofit that was about, empowering youth to speak up for the climate crisis. And so that immersed me back into the ecological piece. But then what happened is I had these two parts of my life, my connection with Jesus, my devotion to, spirituality and to, you know, service to the world. And this deep reality that this earth is connected with. That's where I most experienced God.
Mhm.
Even when I was a pastor, it was then that I really felt it, that solo time in nature. And so I realized I had these two different parts of me, and they didn't overlap, other than in the climate world to be like, well, let's get churches involved in our
Mhm.
campaign. And in the church world, it's like, well, we'll, lower our carbon footprint or something. But the deep reason why we need the church is because this climate change is a spiritual problem of
Yes.
disconnection. And that's what the church is about, is, supporting people in, living in a new way, in a reconnected way, which is the word religion means reconnection.
Mhm.
So it's like, that's what it's about. And I didn't see it happening. And so I started researching it for myself. I'm like, do I need to leave the church permanently in order to be faithful to my experience of God? Or do I need to let go of that experience of God to be faithful to the church? Because I had gone back and I was a pastor again by this time of an indoor church. And, it's sort of a false dichotomy. Well, it's a false decision, which I found out very quickly. And I immersed myself actually next with that experience. How do I deepen my sort of contemplative experience of the holy, of God
Mhm.
in nature? And the aligning task, I didn't think of it that way at the time, but was does scripture really say that God is not in a tree,
Mhm.
that God is not found in nature, which had been told to me by people? Um, and I found, like, within 5 seconds that no, that's not true.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
fact, every single leader of the that every single spiritual leader in both the Old Testament and the New were thrust, drawn, pushed, sent into wilderness
Mhm.
at a
Yes.
pivotal time in history and in a pivotal time in their own leadership, including Jesus. And so I was like, there's something to this. It's more than just a metaphor. There's something real about what happens in the actual desert, forest, meadow, ocean that is necessary for for being faithful in our religion, in our faith.
Mhm.
So it was that. And then, I was associate pastor of a church at the time, and I just kept preaching about that kind of thing. And finally, when it was time for me to leave, my last sermon was about logos as conversation.
Mm.
And people came up to me afterwards and they're like, that church you've been talking about for 3 years, that's where we want to go to church.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I told them, like, we can't do that. I'm making this up, this isn't real. And so we just, after a while, I just started. And we started meeting outside I was living in Ojai, California at the time, and we'd meet outside on off the trails under oak trees. And just kind of developed a different way of approaching,
Mhm.
worship and church.
Uh-huh.
And that, the trees are already, the Psalms even tell us, Thomas Merton tells us, the trees are already in a state of worship.
Mhm.
The earth is in deep relationship with the holy. And we're not inviting them into our worship, which is what I wrote about 35 years ago at World Vision. It's that the rest of the alive world is inviting us into the
Yes.
worship that is happening all the time. Like when Jacob woke up and realized, oh my gosh, this land is holy, and I
Mhm.
didn't know it. That's how it feels. It's like all of this has been holy all along,
Yes.
and I was just
And we
blind.
don't notice it. Yes. Well, one of the things that's fascinating for me is, probably 20 years ago now, I started asking people, what makes you feel close to God?
Mm.
And the two major things that people said, of course, were some aspect of nature and something to do with children. And I would cynically say, what do we do in church? We shut out nature and we
And
send the
children.
kids away. Yeah.
So true.
And I think we've improved a little bit on the kid thing, at least in the church we go to, but not in the nature thing.
Mhm.
Some churches have, but it's true. This is where people connect to God.
Right.
Uh, and
There's been actually surveys done. I read one through, I think it was through Pew, that asked people, where do you most experience the numinous? That was the question.
Mhm,
And like 76% of the people that don't go to church say it's nature. And like,
exactly.
and the people that do go to church, it's like 75%. So it's like, it's just real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Sorry, I
that's
didn't
that
interrupt.
was my kind of ad hoc kind of survey type of thing that I got about the same,
Interesting. Yeah.
percentages. And yeah, it's true. And, I at that time wrote a book called To Garden with God that came out of
Oh,
some of my reflections before it was kinda gaining, uh, interest, generally.
becoming more accepted or whatever.
And
Integrated.
I read oh, no, it wasn't for that book. It was when I wrote, uh, The Gift of Wonder that I read about wild
Mm,
church and forest church, which of course started in Britain. So
mhm.
tell us a bit more about what forest church looks like and, how does a gathering, come about? And, I'm reading about more and more churches that are doing this or that are
Mhm.
interested in it. So what can you tell them or tell us about
Yes,
that?
yes. Well, when I started doing this, I was just kind of making things up, like I said, um, and the interesting thing is when I started then within like 3 months, I started meeting pastors all over North America that were doing the same thing. And of course, I was aware of the forest church movement in Britain, but at the time there were no churches in the US that were doing it.
No, no, that's what I found,
Yeah.
yes.
And, I remember I kinda contacted them and, talked to Bruce a couple times but I personally didn't like the word forest
Mhm.
because the word came
It's
about
very confining in a way,
confined.
yeah,
But then I had a personal issue too, 'cause it came about when the king would, keep some of the forest for himself to kill
uh-huh,
deer.
yes.
And it's like, I'm not naming my church after something that kills deer and for the king. So anyway, I came up with the name Church of the Wild. And after I was meeting all these other pastors, they had different names, but we realized that we were doing something very similar with different sort of mentors and references and books that we read and whatever. And so it was just sort of this interesting phenomenon that this is something bigger than just our own little thing.
Mhm.
And so that's when we started the Wild Church Network. And
Wonderful.
so, And then I just came out with another book with my sister, who's the director of the Wild Church Network right now. And it's called The Field Guide to Church of the Wild. And what we did there is we just had been observing for, several years that it's been 10 years now, observing what were common. We were convinced from the very beginning that this isn't something we say, here's how you do it. And everybody who signs off on these, faith doctrines can be in the network, It was that this is an emergence that's bigger than us. And so we're just observing what is happening and collecting that. So things have changed through the years, and it's, growing and emerging. So now we have over, 350 wild churches in North America.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But what we do, I haven't even gotten to your question yet. So
that's okay. Yeah.
What is common? That's what in the field guide, we took, the primary, things that people do, and then tell stories from like 30 different wild church pastors.
Oh, wonderful.
Stories and ideas and liturgies and stuff is in there. So, if anybody wants to start their own gathering, that's a good resource.
It's a good book.
That's why we
good resource.
It. Yeah. But there's one piece that, there's the commonalities of like land acknowledgements and rewilding prayer and things like that, different rituals. But what's common to all of them, I think almost all of them, is this time of, I call it just sacred conversation with the holy and the wild. And so it's everybody leaves the circle, pretty much everybody, almost most of the churches meet in circles. They leave the circle after a while, and I would always have it be a 30 to 40 minute wandering. They leave and they wander until they feel drawn to a particular place or being or color or whatever, and just kind of trust that, and then sit down and observe, listen, feel. It's like a centering prayer kind of thing, but you also trust ideas that come up and memories that come up and mirroring that happens of, like, for example, there's a little story in my book about, I was just going down to the little bay when I lived up in Bellingham, and there was this one goose that was just like going around this bay with this like wailing, sad cry, because I'd seen this goose as a couple for many weeks. And I could just, and then I noticed that there was like one seagull and one crow, and I was like, and it really it mirrored for me how I was just feeling alone. And so it's like trusting that there is communication, there is conversation that isn't just words like what we're doing right now, but it's something that is mediated by the holy. It is mediated by, it's like when Jesus says, whenever two or more are gathered, I am with them. And it's not just that you're gathered and you're sitting there ignoring each other. It's when you're in relationship and in conversation. So I see conversation as more than words, and as like the sinew of relationship, the sinew, the connector, the presence of God is in that connection. So anyway, that's just an example. So people then, after 40 minutes or whatever, come back into the circle and share what they experienced. And so it's like taking it from the more kind of like, I don't know, masculine, patriarchal, shall we say, way of most churches, that is like one person from the front telling everybody else what they think. And everybody else goes, okay, I'll sing this song. But, I always was uncomfortable with that, even as a pastor. It's like, who am I? So what? I went to seminary, and I spent some time thinking about this, but who am I? How you experience God and this passage is just as important. But I couldn't ever find a way to encourage that kind of self-authority to understand that your experience of God is important too. And I can learn from your experience of God, and having my experience be witnessed helps it become more real to me too. So that's what would happen in the end of these, this council kind of time, is you're expanding your experience beyond what you just experienced with the blue jay as your preacher to hearing how everybody else is processing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of this built-in um, um, structure of that's actually a lot more feminine.
Mm-hmm.
In a
Mm-hmm.
circle, everybody's voice matters. The leader is still
Yes.
necessary, but the leader is holding space
Yes.
and making sure that everybody feels included and belonging.
Women are much better at a teamwork kind of approach to leadership, I think. I'm going to skip to one of the quotes, one of my favorite quotes in your book, Church of the Wild, on page 91, when you say learning, because it kind of relates to something that you said, learning how to converse with leaves and the long stares of mule deer is a spiritual practice that begins with a sense of wonder. That
Mm.
was one of my favorite quotes. These moments are usually very small and humble moments of awe. Revelation can be like that. First, you experience a numinous moment, and then you need to find a frame for it and hang it up for others to see. Often these moments knock everything else off the walls, rearranging your worldview. Mystical conversations defy language, but not naming them leaves them without context, unable to grow into their meaning.
Mm.
That's a wonderful quote from your book, Church of the Wild, the one that preceded the field guide. And I believe that wonder is one of the keys
And
to a
that's your
broader
book, right?
understanding. Yes.
You wrote it. Yeah.
And again, I feel as though I was ahead of the curve. I think I
Mhm.
write
You
books
have been
ahead of
for
the
40
curve.
years.
Yes, it's kind of like, okay. And people are starting to recognize wonder. And of course, the more we connect to creation. But what is new for me that I think is so key in what you're talking about is actually not just the wonder, but the conversation
Mhm.
that we have with creation
Right.
and the importance of that. And I feel in some ways that is probably something that's key to the development of the Seminary of the Wild, which
Mm.
is the other thing you've developed. So I'm probably putting you on the spot to a certain extent, but can you tell us more about the Seminary of the Wild and how it draws us into conversation with the wild?
Yeah, I love that you ask it that way because that's really the core of it. We're um, the first year of the seminary is really about deepening your relationship with the rest of the alive and sacred world. And then the second year is now how are you being called to help others reconnect?
Mhm,
And it's all about holy listening. It's all about listening and then responding because, and which is all about love. Like if you say, I love otters, you know, like the word love, first of all, is anemic, but if you say, I love otters, I give my whole, I give money to otter saving and I, go volunteer for otters, like that's great. But that's why I like the words falling in love. Because when you fall in love, you don't fall in love with like otters or people or children. Like you fall in love with a particular child and you fall in love with a particular other person.
mhm,
And then
mhm,
through that love relationship, your heart expands so that you love the whole. That's
mhm,
just kind of the way it works. And so it's about really falling in love with with your particular place and the particular beings in your place. And how does love happen? It happens through conversation.
mm,
Again, which
mhm,
is not just words.
mm,
And
mhm,
so it's like expanding our understanding of conversation, which was a huge revelation for me that when the word conversation first started coming into sort of a bigger expansive meaning was like 500 years before Jesus,
mhm,
where a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, was like, use the word logos, which meant then conversation, which meant the holiness that is in all things as it's connected. And so, I think that's a beautiful definition of conversation and of what love is, so like they're just so connected. And so Seminary of the Wild is a deep dive for people to, remember how to listen, beyond their own expectations of what the other is, beyond their own shortcut. Oh, I know oak tree, I know what that is. Oh, you're a woman over the age of 60, I know everything about you, we do that to each other. But it's not real. It's not fair. Like I could live every single day with my, 17-year-old daughter and not know her at all, even if we talk every day, because there's a sacred otherness. I think that's what reverence is, and wonder too. It's like it's an acknowledgement of an otherness, and that's set apart. It's sacred, And so that otherness is always a mystery. And so to say we don't know what a tree is saying in those leaves, it's true, but I actually don't know what my daughter's saying either. So that's the relationship, is getting to know the other. And it's a two-way relationship. So that's another part of Seminary of the Wild. It's like what Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass and other of her writings talks about in an indigenous worldview, that it's a sacred reciprocity. Like that's how life is. And, the quantum physicists are agreeing with that. And the thing is, because at the center of all things is a relationship, not nouns. It's like a movement, a attractionness-ing. But the thing is that the Christian tradition is that as well. We've just forgotten, it's like even just the word God. The only time that God used God's name is in that encounter with Moses. And we interpret it as I am who I am, because we're so noun based, but it's a verb. God's answer is a verb. And it's, it's like I am, it's not even I am, it's just like becomingness, and becoming is what it is. That's what the word means. And so that's what life is. It's like we're becoming together, and it's the togetherness that matters. So
yes.
So, and this is generations of being disconnected from that reality.
Yes.
And so it takes some intentional
hundreds of years of disconnected. Yes.
Yes. Intentional disconnection, because
yes.
you can't oppress or use or a person or a forest for your own benefit unless you objectify them.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's been intentional disconnection.
Yeah. Way back to when Constantine became...
Even further than that.
Yeah, probably further than that.
Yeah,
but that seems to be the very decisive kind of turning in terms of Christianity.
In terms of Christianity, absolutely, yes. But that disconnection doesn't just go away when you go, aha, we are all connected, It takes a practice. And so Seminary of the Wild is a container for that practice. We have a curriculum of deepening into listening, deepening into the practice of conversation, learning to trust that your dreams, like the dreams throughout the whole Bible, have meaning. And it is another way of conversation. Conversation within yourself, learning conversation with other people. So it's a lot of that. And so that's what the whole year is. It's just like a support system as we are unlearning the disconnection and relearning what we already deeply know, because humans have been deeply connected with the rest of the natural world as part of nature, as part of a holy whole, since humans were humans. There's evidence of religious practices,
yes,
way longer.
Yes, yes.
And so, it's just like that religion, reconnection, religamenting, is the point. So to me, this is what I hoped church would be, is honoring one another's inherent gifts to the world, that we're all here on purpose.
Lovely.
And, and we teach that within religion, but then we don't support it.
Yes.
We just
Yes.
say it and we hope people figure it out on their own. But this is a support system as we deepen in. It's a lot of people, it's mostly women, not surprisingly. And it's mostly, women when they're hitting this midlife time
Mhm,
or retirement time of going, I have to reorient my focus to be of service to the world
mhm.
at this time of unraveling, especially. So,
Yes, so important. You give me itchy feet to get more involved with something like this. So, and in your book, Church of the Wild, you also quote one of my favorite books, Landmarks.
oh, I'm so glad you picked that out.
Oh, yes. Well, I love, the talk about the island of Lewis, and I
Mhm.
understand that you have visited there. So I'll let you tell the story of what Robert McFarlane talked about, because again, it's the same kind of thing of changing our worldview and helping others
Mm,
change their worldview in a way that gives them a reverence for the world and not a utilitarian view of it.
right. Right, and we can so easily do that, and what McFarlane talks about in his book is that in the Isle of Lewis, um, they were confronted, as many of the whole Scottish Isles, that whole
Mhm,
area, as the whole world is confronted by energy companies wanting to use land for, different energy production. Um, and all of the other townships, places, counties had sort of tried to fight in the traditional ways, going to city council, having, petitions, whatever, tried to fight this, but all of them lost. The only one that didn't was the Isle of Lewis. And what they did is they had some brilliant activists who started a campaign of getting people to re-story
mhm,
their place. And so to tell stories again, remember stories, remember songs that were connected with place, and make new ones, right? New paintings, new poems, new songs, new stories. And what that did is it established relationship, which is this what it's all about. It established relationship with place, and then when they were ready to go to the city council and whatnot, it was the whole
mhm,
community showed up, and they're like, "No way, we are in love with this place," because their bogs were just considered, oh, that's wasteland.
mhm, mhm,
And they fell in love with the bogs again. And what's fascinating is after his story, the um they were able to, reject the corporate is a windmill company.
mhm,
They were able to reject them, and then they raised money to have their own windmill. So they weren't against wind energy. They were
mhm,
against a zillion wind
mhm,
you know,
mhm.
turbines taking up and ruining their whole
And
bog.
ruining the yeah, mhm,
Yeah, and so they're practically off the grid, but what's really cool is that empowered them even more to take ownership of their energy in their community, very windy island. And then they were able to essentially kick out the British laird that had sort of owned the island for hundreds of years. I don't know how long, but and then so that was another like amazing step. But
mhm,
then I think the most remarkable one is they turned the whole island into a community town, into a community trust. And so, people still can buy houses and stuff, but it's all owned by the community. Like,
mm.
what a remarkable model for us
Yes,
of when we're
yes.
trying to imagine beyond capitalism. Like, how is that even possible when everything is owned by either the government or people, individuals? So I'm really drawn to. I definitely want to go back and
Mhm.
meet. I wasn't able to meet the actual activists, but I need more time uh, to go back there. And I hope I was supposed to go this summer and didn't happen again. And so maybe next year or the year after, I'll be able to go back and
Oh, it is such a wonderful
learn more.
story. And of course, and Scotland somehow seems to be at the forefront of some
Right?
of these kinds of things, because I know there are other areas in Scotland now where the rewilding movement
Yes.
has really taken taken
And
hold.
replanting
Mhm, mhm.
trees and reforesting it's been deforested there for a long time since the
Yes,
Romans,
yes. Oh,
and
yeah, yeah, I, I'm skipping around on what I'd planned to ask you, but it kind of brings in something that I read this morning that I wanted to mention because it was kind of horrifying to me. But
mm,
this whole rewilding thing, we don't realize the significance of it in so many levels, and the kind of work that you're involved in doing. But I was reading this article, and of course, you suffer from Lyme's disease. So, even on a personal level, it has some significance. But this article I was reading about how the lack of biodiversity
mm,
and and the natural forested kind of areas increase the invasive species and increase the tick population and diseases like Lyme's disease. Um, and I was thinking how important this kind of work is in dimensions that we're only just starting
right.
to think of. And I think how many diseases, I think of the elm tree disease, I can't think of what it's
Mm,
called, that swept across North America. And I think how much of this is due to the wrong kind of human intervention?
absolutely, almost all of it.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah,
And what we can do and these movements that we're starting to see for rewilding, for making wildlife gardens, for all of these kinds of things, introducing wildlife into the farms, and
right.
what an incredible difference they can make.
And it's so connected. Like at Seminary of the Wild, we have a module or whatever that's around rewilding your soul, rewilding spirituality, but we begin with rewilding place,
Hmm.
rewilding the land, and the work of Mary Reynolds in Ireland, where she talks about acts of restorative kindness, where
Hmm.
we take half of whatever land we have some capacity to impact, and rewild it.
Yes.
And rewilding means, like here where you and I live and in Washington, often you begin with removing the invasive species, removing
Yes.
the, blackberries or whatever that has taken over. And they have a role too in the long term. Like they only take over places that are really damaged,
Hmm.
and so they actually, if we had a long-term vision, they actually are sourcing the
Helping.
soil,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
um, or gophers, they're helping in ways. They're an annoyance for our garden, but, so there is a place for it, but also the ones that start like the bindweeds that are just
Yes.
so hard to get rid of, and
Oh, impossible.
yeah, and they just take over and they kill everybody else. I mean,
Mhm.
if sort of like humans, we are the ultimate invasive species.
We're bindweed.
We are bindweed, right, and so just to even compassionately, address that first step of, like, the invasive species, step of this needs to be pulled back, and
Mhm.
to feel that in our mirroring in our lives. Where am I an invasive species
Mm.
still? Where I'm
Yes.
still that personally as well as obviously collectively.
Yes.
Um
Yes.
but then the diversity is so like that, what you just read, the diversity is so important. It's not just, "Let's plant a bunch of trees again,"
Mhm. All the same, all
haphazardly.
in rows, all
Right.
yes.
And then because you can feel it. You can feel if you go into some of those forests, they're like, 4th and 5th growth, and all the trees are the same, and all the trees are about the same age. It's sorta like a group of adolescents with no adults, Dangerous.
Uh-huh.
And, and so that diversity, and that's all about conversation too. Like the forest, a healthy forest has great diversity. They're all in
Yes.
conversation with one another, and the biologists like Susan Simard,
Mhm.
are all, bringing that study, to the masses, that this is
Yes.
real. The conversations that the trees have, that how all the species kind of take care of each other in this relationship of reciprocity, and we're part of it,
Mhm.
but we've removed ourselves. So that has an impact, obviously, on the land. It has an impact on our own souls, on who we are as humans. and we can feel that in that sense of loneliness, that the pervasive, epidemic of loneliness is part of that disconnection.
Yes,
It's
disconnection.
disconnection from other people. It's disconnection from the rest of the creation, the rest of
Yes.
the alive, interconnected, holy family, And it impacts our spirituality to talk
Yes.
about, like you said earlier, to talk about, prayer without the wilderness, where Jesus went not just in the wilderness, but every single time he went to pray, he went into.
Yes.
Preposition means in relationship with, not just location.
Mhm.
And so, we skip, we sever it. We're so good at severing.
Yes.
We sever. We talk about prayer all the time in church. And maybe we'll go on a retreat where there's some wilderness outside that you can go play in later.
Oh, I
But
know. I've done
integrate it.
retreats like that I just wanna let's do it all outside.
Yeah. And not only just as an environment, but integrated. That's what
Yes.
Wild Church is. It's integrating this into what it means to be human, what it means to be in relationship with this place, what it means to belong.
Mhm.
And so all of that is interconnected. And so it's a lot of unlearning and relearning that doesn't happen quickly.
Mhm.
And it's an ongoing spiritual practice, which is why we need community to live into that, because it's a lot of letting go of privileges that we have gotten used to that were never really ours in the first place. And so it is a letting go and a release and a sacrifice, which is what Jesus is all about, right?
Exactly.
We give
Yes.
our lives for others, and we do it all the time. All beings do it, It's
Mhm.
not La La Land being part of nature that, the birds sing and we have beautiful sunsets. It's also the reality that of the Pascal mystery is in all
Mhm.
things, that
Yes.
that
Oh, yeah.
creation keeps us alive.
It's
Um,
interesting because the first, um, Easter I spent in the Northern Hemisphere was
hmm,
an absolute revelation to me of what the real Easter story was about, the death and the resurrection and the
mm.
new life, because I just couldn't relate with the way Easter was in the Southern Hemisphere.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Yeah. And since then, of course, I have seen, as you say, the life, death, and resurrection in so many aspects of creation that bring us into the story that we need to come into. My latest research I'm looking at, and I think you'll find this interesting, is on the tree of life in the Garden of
Oh,
Eden. And I
fancy.
think, we have this kind of an apple tree, and I think, no, 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 no. The tree of life, more to me, is like this interconnected. Like in
Right.
Revelation, it talks about the tree of life down both sides of the river. I think that's one tree. It's
Right.
it's it's connected. And I think to myself, I
Mm,
think it's not just down one side of a river, but I think the tree of life is this interconnected network that we're talking about
right,
that really goes through the entire earth.
right,
And I think that to me, that is much more um, of an image of the tree of life as it is in the book of Revelation, at the end of
right.
Revelation.
Amen.
So I'm kind of getting
Ooh,
ready to
that's
do some
great.
writing on this because
So good. It just and, that a lot of indigenous cultures understand tree of life more than we do,
exactly in that kind of a way, yeah,
Right,
much
and
more.
yeah, it's just and that's what I'm feeling about, just I feel myself going back to even some of the things that were important to me as an evangelical, 30 years ago,
Mhm.
is that it's not true, it's that I didn't understand it well.
Yes,
And now
yes,
I'm going, "Oh, that's what Jesus was talking about," Now I'm starting to understand or experience, I guess, that's the only way you can really understand, a lot of what, for years I was sort of like pulling away from because I think it was just dogmatized, is that a word?
uh-huh, uh-huh,
Dogmatized, um, and turned into, something to believe rather than something to live.
uh-huh,
But religion is of course finding meaning in what life is, not
Yes.
trying to create a different thing to believe. And so, of course, we need to integrate, what science is learning, because it's like learning about the others. I'd love to learn about everything. That'd be
Yes.
awesome. But it
Me too.
doesn't replace it.
Yes.
It
Mhm.
adds to it. It
Oh,
deepens.
it does. I mean, my faith, my Christian faith has deepened as I've broadened it,
Yes, that's it.
and I think that that's a lot of what we need to learn. I think it was Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury. I read something that he wrote where he said that our faith is either stagnating or it's growing.
Yeah,
He said there are only those two things,
it's
I
true.
think. Um, and I just wanted to, we've kind of, we're running out of time here, but I wanted to give one final quote that I love in Church of the Wild. I am yearning for a wild God that compels me to full participation in this miraculous dance of life, deepening the meaning in a core Jesus saying, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. A wild God who calls us to a deeper understanding of Jesus. Just a wonderful, wonderful concept. So, as we finish off here, just tell me a little more about what you mean by that wild. I know you're working on another book, Wild Spirituality, and I suspect this wild God is at the center of that.
Yeah, it's so hard to answer that quickly. But
Yes, I can imagine. I'm sorry, I'm throwing things at, and we'll have to do another when you get your
yes,
next book out. We'll have
yes,
to
when the
do
book comes
another
out, I'll be much more
interview.
interested.
Mhm,
But I think it's what I'm feeling. Let's see, how do I answer this? So I'm going to answer this in a particular way, but there's so much more to say. In Seminary of the Wild, we created it in the beginning we thought it was for Christian pastors.
mhm,
The, I had some partners in the beginning, and 3 of us were pastors, and we thought, a lot of spiritual leaders are feeling this
mhm,
reality, but they don't know how to bring their congregation along with them. So that's what we thought Seminary of the Wild would be. We very, very quickly found out that's not true.
mm,
And so while we still continue to have maybe, between, 5 and 20% pastors, the about half the people aren't even connected with the Christ tradition,
mhm.
but they feel
Interesting.
they're
Yeah.
drawn to something that's rooted in it, in it, but not in the institution.
Mhm,
And so it's people on the inside edge or the outside edge of the Christ tradition, if there were an edge. um, it's because there's something to this teaching of the and wisdom of the Christ tradition that we're wanting to revisit. And I feel like it's not just it's a time. I think it's Phyllis Tickle was talking about how, every 500 years, the Christian
mhm,
tradition, really has a big shift. And she said the tradition, the shift that's coming, and this was written, 20 years ago,
mhm,
the shift that's coming is bigger than the shift that happened in the world when Jesus came. And I was
mm,
like, wow, that's a big way to say that. But I see it, I feel it now. That what needs to happen, there's something in the roots of that
mhm,
our tradition that is about right relationship
mhm.
with all.
With everything.
And so
Yes.
people both within the tradition and outside are yearning for that. And so I
Yes.
don't think it's a reformation. It's not something we're going to shift a little bit. It's like a complete reconstruction
Yes.
that's also a return to what, like all the reformations think they're going back to the first century, right? But I feel like it's something, and none of us can talk about it yet. We all feel it, but because it's still emerging. And so, like the other quote you said, like the more we talk about it that feels like, oh, this isn't quite it, but here's kind of that's important. And
Mhm,
so I feel like that's the time we're in right now. And it is. I had a mystical experience that would be too long to share right now, but I'll just tell the end of it. At the ending was a calling. I talk about it in the book a little. And it was an experience I had with this encounter with this great horned owl, where we just kind of like stared at each other for like a half an hour in the middle of the day.
I remember that. It was a
Yeah.
powerful story.
And at the end of I walked away, and then I heard within, when you know it's a God thing versus here's a good idea I just had. And at the end of it, it was rewild the church. Makes me cry right now just remembering. So at the core of what I feel like my calling is, and what I think is happening bigger than me, is that we're not reforming the church, we're rewilding it.
I love that. What a wonderful note to end on. Just the wonderful thought that part of our calling, and not just for you or not just for
Right.
me, but for everybody that's listening and those that aren't, is to rewild the church. Wonderful. Thank you,
Amen.
Victoria. This has been just phenomenal.
Thank you, thank you. So good to be with you. What a gift.
And you too. You too. In today's conversation, Victoria Loorz and I explored the intersection of faith and ecology, discussing Victoria's journey from a corporate career to leadership in the wild church movement. We delved into the importance of connecting spirituality with nature, the emergence of the wild church network, and the significance of sacred conversations with the natural world. Victoria shared insights from her work with the Seminary of the Wild, emphasizing the need for intentional practices to foster a deeper relationship with the earth and each other. Victoria and I discussed the importance of rewilding both the land and the soul, emphasizing the need for storytelling and the community empowerment in fostering a deeper relationship with the natural world. The dialogue highlighted the interconnectedness of health, biodiversity, and spirituality, advocating for a holistic approach to living in harmony with nature. The concept of a wild God was introduced as a call to action for individuals to engage more fully in the miraculous dance of life, ultimately leading to a rewilding of the church and spiritual practices. In the next episode of Liturgical Rebels, I will be in conversation with Rachel Jordan, a professional marine biologist and lay theologian whose writing creatively bridges supposed gaps between sacred and secular. A self-professed Jesus-loving coral nerd, she is the author of If the Ocean Has a Soul, a marine biologist's pursuit of truth through deep waters of faith and science. I am Christine Sine, the author of Celtic Advent, Following an Unfamiliar Path, and The Gift of Wonder. My other books include Digging Deeper, The Art of Contemplative Gardening, and To Garden with God. I also write regularly on Substack. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.